competition is for suckers.
Hi, and welcome to the Financial Fox, Investing and Innovation Ideas with a Twist. I'm your host, Steffy, and in today's episode, I will be joined by Miko Matsumura, blockchain investor and startup builder. Miko is a general partner at Gumi Ventures, a US $30 million investment fund focused on early stage blockchain startup, and is also a co-founder of a crypto exchange, Evercoin. I met Miko last month during an NFT conference where we both were on a panel discussion talking about NFTs, and I was impressed by his strong stance on the creator economy and his views on how technology is building a world more consensual, fair, inclusive, and transparent. So we are going to talk today about investing in Web3 infrastructure and application, and why it is such a compelling proposition for forward-thinking investors to jump into the space.
The point of there being a DeFi is that DeFi produces freedom for people who aren't even using it.
But before we go into the episode, I want to talk about my new crypto web domain name, financialfox.crypto. I got it from Unstoppable Domains, which is creating a new generation of web domains, which are actually domain names on a blockchain. So when you buy them once, and you don't have to worry about renewable fees anymore because they are yours forever. So they are decentralized as well. So no one can take them down or hack your data. And because they are effectively domain NFTs, you can trade them and make money once the decentralized web will be taking over the internet, because that is going to happen. Anyway, the cool things is that you can make any crypto payment using your domain name. So you just add your wallet address to your domain name and forget about it. And when you need to get paid, you just give the person your crypto web domain and everything is done. So it's so easy. And you can get any Unstoppable Domains names you want to be, because they just released some really cool extension. If you're going to use the link in the description below, you're going to help our channel, and that is so much appreciated. And also, if you want to do a little bit more to help us because you like the work we are doing and the content that we are producing, then you can make a donation in Ethereum, Bitcoin, or USDC to financialfox.crypto, and that will be super, super awesome. Right, let's get into the episode. Hi, Miko, how are you?
Very good. Thank you.
It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. Excited to be here.
Right, so shall we maybe start with some information about your background and how did you get involved in investment in technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you go back in my background, I strangely have a technical background in neuroscience, and it really comes from the study of abstract neural networks and computation, right? But the thing that is so strange about how my career changed is you would think that with that background, I would be involved in the AI business. But instead, I really kind of focused very much on open source software. And, ultimately this trend brought me to developer platforms, and the developer platform business has, I've been in Silicon Valley for almost 30 years working on open source, which of course led to my interest in blockchain. So, what I'm doing now is working on a fund, and I'm a general partner with the fund GCC, or Gumi Cryptos Capital. And, we deploy venture capital into supporting this growing trend, which is, of course, the blockchain, NFT, and cryptographic asset business.
Yeah, I think what I really would like to break down with you is the development in Web3, because this is one of the areas that gets you more excited. I mean, I remember when we had the conversation at the NFT conferences about, the nomenclature to use for some aspect, for example, about monetizing data, and how perhaps the way we use now to describe things in Web3 actually has to change. And so if we can maybe start clarifying what is Web3, and then how you think the human being and his assets is changing from Web 2 to Web 3.
Yeah, so I think that, first of all, I know Web3 is a very popular phrase, and I think that to me, the existence of Web3 is dependent on there having been a Web2, right? And I am not a fan of even describing there as having been a Web2, right? So the thing that I think is fundamental about the Web3 movement is that, we are rebuilding the entirety of the internet. And why would we do such a thing, right? And to me, there are just foundational elements that are missing and have created this almost very toxic internet at the moment, right? So I think that what are the missing ingredients for the internet? So I think one of the biggest missing ingredients is data privacy, right? So I think that's a huge missing ingredient. I think the other missing ingredient is sort of, authenticity, right? Which is this idea of, knowing who is who and what is what, right? And then of course, the other thing that's missing is digital asset ownership, right? So that's another piece that's missing, and then finally, the thing that's missing is this idea of consent and consensus, right? And so the thing that has happened is that our real analog world has failed to produce a consensus reality, right? People can't even agree about things like a pandemic virus, or they can't agree on just basic facts about like voting, or so there's really our existent analog reality has failed to produce consensus. So in a sense, what will happen is that increasingly we will be reliant on consensus algorithms, right, which adjudicate a consensual reality, right? And that people will agree to occupy this digital reality for the reason that it produces consensus. So I guess it's a long-winded thing I'm saying, but what I'm really trying to say is that we are rebuilding the internet with pieces that are missing, and it turns out that every piece that I've described as missing is effectively solved by this, so-called blockchain technology, right? Which is this novel, cryptographically secure consensus history recording device, right? So this is really a new decentralized history that also produces a consensus. So I think that will be the final resting spot for our consensual reality.
My question here is that, right, empowering individuals, offering them all these kind of tools, services, and ability to interact independently between each other, so peer-to-peer network, obviously give as an assumption that every individual know how to do it and know what's important for him. So how do you build up this kind of education and a common understanding to allow people to properly interact in a Web3 environment?
Yeah, I think education is so foundational, right? And in a sense, the thing that is really so amazing about some of the developments in this space is that, the initial availability of the freedom to select infrastructure, it turns out has this kind of freedom to do wrong things, right? That human beings are always kind of encumbered by their freedoms, right? So the system that produces freedom also produces people just buying Dogecoins or, just doing things that actually make no sense, right? And they become sort of subject to these influencers, and a lot of the dependence on influencers, if you go back to the creation of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto was like the world's biggest anti-influencer, right? Because he basically said, I don't have a YouTube channel, I don't have any channel, I don't even exist, I'm gone. So he just removed him or herself, like basically just removed this concept, right, from the center of, and now that hole is filled with creeps, so I think that there are a lot of toxic influences, right? So I think when you say education, really freedom has to come with the responsibility of individuals to educate themselves and to learn what is toxic and what actually serves them, right? So I think in order for us to have nice things, we individuals have to study what's best for themselves, and not become fooled by people trying to trick them and trying to steal their money, their energy, their data, to steal from them.
So basically, you are saying it's going to be an evolutionary process where people understand, right, this way is better for me, and the other one, they don't embrace the new movement, basically they can let behind, and then the world is going to change with the next generation, basically. It's going to happen gradually.
Yeah, I think it has to, right? Because people go into new lands and new territories and new environments kind of gradually, and they experience sort of, if they go into the wrong areas, they can experience some harm, right? And the question becomes, can they come back smarter? Right? Is it possible? Right? And so this is part of this process of gradualism, right? So I think that's the real need, is for people to learn and come back smarter, right? That's what we need.
Okay, let's talk a bit about ownership, which is something that you mentioned early, and obviously in Web3 there is more awareness about each individual assets. So do you want maybe to just basically explain how the concept of ownership has changed with Web3, and then we can go a little bit more in details, perhaps into DeFi and then NFTs as well.
Absolutely. So I love that you've cued into ownership as something so foundational and central to this new internet, so-called Web3, because when I think about it, we've been kind of subjected to all of these sort of new economies, right? So people say like, oh, there is the attention economy, or, oh, now there is the sharing economy, or, oh, now there is the gig economy, and it's basically all BS. The reason why I'm speaking very strongly is every single one of those things is the same economy. It is the extraction economy. It is the economy where people are their energy and resources are taken from them, right? And that's by kind of the owners, right? So to me, this is absolutely sort of, rampant, laissez-faire sort of global capitalism. And to me, like, obviously competition, there's elements of these systems that have some benefits, but I think that when you look at something like open source competes for consent. And so what the key to open source is that the developers have to continuously pump out beneficial improvements, or else they will lose consent to systems that do. Right. So unless you strive to serve your community better, your system will be abandoned in favor of a system that continues to evolve towards serving the most people in the best way, right? So that's something that I think can produce healthy economics, right? Because it's the economics of ownership. So, coming back to something like Bitcoin is the reserve bank of the internet. But the thing that's interesting about the reserve bank is that it is owned by the users. And it's owned by the users proportional to their usage, right? So it's very, very simplistic. But the thing that's so interesting is that why does your bank not give you much yield, right? Like if you store your money in a bank, you're probably not getting much out of that experience, right? And the question is, who is getting benefit out of that experience? It's the people who own the bank. So, you're the target of extraction, right? Which is that the fact that your money is traveling around the world, fueling commerce and creating sort of yield. It's like, why do you not get any of it? Right? Like that feels like theft, right? So the thing that I think is really central is that this is the first technology economy that's differentiated, right? This is not the gig economy, the sharing economy, the attention economy, the dopamine economy, like whatever all these economies are the same thing, right? Like the thing that this is the ownership economy, which is really a foundational transformation, and obviously like there's creeps in here and there's tricks in here and there's scams in here. So like, we're going through this period of confusion, and not everything in blockchain is pure, but I think open source is pure. And I think over time, developers are going to create systems that everybody will want to use.
So that's a great background. If we go a little bit more into that, then we talk about DeFi and we talk about ownership of money. I mean, you brought up Bitcoin, and my question will be: do you think Bitcoin is ultimately the solution to the money problem, and how do you see DeFi happening and playing around, and if you think there is something great that is developing there and what isn't perhaps something good?
Yeah. So, I think if I were to look at something like Bitcoin and DeFi, which is sort of largely Ethereum DeFi, is that, when you look at Bitcoin, it is a solution to a problem, right? So whenever you look at any technology, I think the two things I would be very cautionary about is I would be very cautionary about the idea of diversification, right? Which is that, to me, if you're involving yourself financially in any new edgy technology, which all of these are edgy, like Bitcoin is edgy, Ethereum is edgy, and obviously that doesn't even count the unbelievably crazy and edgy things people are buying. Those are the most mature and stable, right? So one of the keys to managing risk professionally, which what the professionals do, is diversification, right? So in essence, the idea that everybody should be diversifying not even within cryptographic asset holdings, but even diversifying from those holdings, right? So I think rational people should be holding, some cryptographic assets, but they probably should also be holding other assets too, right? And they should diversify even within that so that they remain safe, right? So for me, I think when you think about the emergence of DeFi, I believe that this is a killer application. I think that the best way to frame it is that you have a central bank, which is kind of ironically a decentralized central bank, and it's a reserve bank, right? So that's Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is sort of the base layer. But the thing that's so interesting is that above that, you have every imaginable other financial service, right? So what you really have is you have global banks, right? And when you think about global banking in centralized finance, you have investment banks, you have retail banks, and you have this combination investment and retail bank, so you have like Goldman Sachs, you have these JP Morgans, you have all these things, right? Those are all emerging out of DeFi, right? So in a sense, you have central banks, which are like Bitcoin, and then you have, other commercial banks, which are more like Ethereum.
All right, that's interesting. So basically, whatever Ethereum is building is kind of like, in a way, also trying to emulate the current finance. I mean, one of the things that we've always been thinking is like, right, DeFi is great because it's broadening access to many more users that before they were not able to access to financial services. So now they can get loan and stuff like that. But at the same time, it is very much mirroring the current financial services. So
Absolutely. So I think that
where we are
there,
going is my question.
yeah, so there's nothing wrong with mirroring existing financial services with one major improvement, right? And the major improvement is that like DeFi by its name is decentralized, right? Whereas traditional is centralized. So in a sense, it's almost like there's really only one sort of dimensional change, but in a sense, it's a little bit like this. It's a little bit like when I talk about things like freedom, right? So how do these systems produce freedom? Right. So there's a couple of ways they produce freedom, but let's define freedom. So freedom, first of all, in freedom, there has to be rules. Right. And when I say there has to be rules is let's say you subscribe to a freedom where there's no rules. Right. So let's say you say something like freedom is everyone gets to do whatever they want. Right. So this now becomes kind of scary. That's a scary freedom, right? Because now I'm like shooting people with a gun and and I'm just living in a state of terror, right? So that does not produce anarchism maybe, but anarchy doesn't produce freedom, and the idea of freedom then becomes there have to be rules. Right. And then also, in addition, there have to be rules is that people have to know the rules. Right. And then they have to choose which rule system that they agree to abide by. But the last bits of freedom, I think, are so important, which is the last two bits are, first of all, that they have to be able to withdraw consent at any time for any reason or for no reason at all. Right. So it's just I no longer like it here for whatever reason. I'm done with this. Right. So that's A. Right. And then B, there needs to be a viable place to go. There has to be a viable place to go. Right. So if you think about traditional finance, those last two properties are not offered. And what I mean by they're not offered is you have nowhere to go. If you object to traditional finance, where else is there? There's nowhere to go, right? So even if you want to withdraw consent, you are trapped, right? So the point of there being a DeFi is that DeFi produces freedom for people who aren't even using it, right? Yeah. Because it offers them a safe and viable place for them to go, right? And as such, it forces traditional finance to compete with this alternative, right? So for the first time now you have competition. And so in a sense, the place where were previously trapped has to do better. They have to do better. If they don't do better, then people will just leave it. They'll be like, you know what? You're not performing. Like I don't like being here. I withdraw my consent. Right now, this is kind of a universal in the sense that people are they vote with their feet, right? So that's what I'm really trying to say. So the emergence of this alternative financial system is one that's governed by these principles, right? But at the same time, it's so new that there are, bad actors and scam artists and monsters, so like, it is currently a Wild West. So, I think it's not, it isn't for everyone yet. Let's put it that way.
Listen, do you think that the future is going to see a winner take all, or you're going to see more like, you're going to think it's going to be more like a place where there are different kind of actors and each one is specialized in a specific solution?
So I think that kind of the laws of competition, generally produce this concept called the power law distribution, right? Which is effectively manifests as sort of a Pareto principle. So the Pareto principle is this called 80-20, right? So it means that there will be something that occupies like an 80% sized slot, right? And then everyone else will occupy kind of the 20% sized slots, right? Because, at some point, all of these machinations will kind of cause the majority of people to say, well, this is the best for most people. Like most people will enjoy this one the most, right? But the thing that the best way to kind of understand this is to look at the history of open source software, right? So for example, in every category of open source software, there's this thing called the long tail, right? So if you look at open source software and you ask yourself something like, what is the best database? Right. So you could say, oh, well, the best database is MySQL. Right. But then other people will show up and be like, well, actually, the best database is Postgres. Right. And then a bunch of other people will show up and be like, the best database isn't even a SQL database. It's a NoSQL database. So that now we say the best. So what I mean by that is that like, in essence, what we'll see in the competition for consent is we're just going to see forking. Right, that's the inherent property of open source software and of open source blockchains, right? Which is that they're going to compete. And if there's anything like the idea of freedom is the idea of having a viable place to go. And the idea of forking and going is basically, I like everything about this except one thing. And I'm just going to remove that one thing and then I'm going to go over here. Right. And the thing that's beautiful about the competition for consent is anyone who wants to can come with me. Yeah. Right. And so if they agree that my system is better, they're going to come. Right. And if they disagree, they're going to stay. Right. They're going to. So the production of these viable, safe alternatives is what will eventually create freedom. Right. I think for people.
Yeah, because ultimately it's a competition for the best user experience or to create the best place where everybody likes it so much there would be more adoption. Yeah, I think that's we kind of extrapolate some very important element here about DeFi, because I really like the aspect of freedom that you have explained very clearly, and I think that's perhaps the most valuable aspect of decentralized finance. So now let's go back to ownership and let's talk about NFTs, because I remember when we were on the NFT conference, I basically said, right, so now I can monetize my assets, and then you stopped me and you said, right, monetize is not the right word and the word to use. And I was listening at a podcast where Charles Hoskinson was talking about the names, the use of names, and he was referring to the DeFi, to finance, to say perhaps we could call it social fi, because he was talking about, the digital identity problem and what Cardano is solving in Africa. So he took out this social element, which is at the basis of finance. And he mentioned about, sometimes we use name, they might not be the right one to describe something, and this nomenclature problem. And that, it came back to me the time that you stopped me and you said monetize is not the right word. So as Web3 is developing and is unfolding this new narrative, this new ecosystem for human beings to interact with each other, how the use of names, the nomenclatures is changing. So yes, go on.
So this is a wonderful topic, right? Because the thing that's so amazing about naming, what's so amazing about it is that most names become popular before people even know what the hell they're talking about, right? And then they stick. So for example, in the United States, there is an indigenous population, right, that people refer to as Indians, right? So they're like, oh, they're Indians, right? And why were they called this, right? They were called this because long ago, there was an explorer who came who thought that they were in India, and when they met the people, they're like, those are Indians, right? And so just like this, so many names. So things like stable coins, like that's a stupid name, right? Because if a stable coin is pegged to the US dollar has lost 90% of its purchasing power over the past, 50 to 70 years, right? And so the idea that it's stable is just nonsense, right? And so people frequently name the idea of a decentralized exchange another terrible concept, right? And I think your original idea, like when you talked about monetizing, right? Like the idea of the creator economy is actually a sublemma of the ownership economy, right? And so the idea of supporting, so to me, creator economy is another one that's actually on the side of the angels, right? The creator economy is not the extraction economy. It's not the sharing economy. It really is something new, right? And so the language of the extraction economy. So for example, the idea of gamification, right? That's another toxic word, right? Because gamification is weaponizing human dopamine in favor of extraction. Right. So the idea of gamification is actually wrong. But the idea of creating human freedom by turning systems into games. Right. So a game is something where we voluntarily submit to a set of rules. Right. And we can absolutely rage quit a game at any time. Right. And that produces this experience of freedom. Right. So when we talk about gamification, that is sort of extraction technology. When we talk about monetization, that is extraction technology. Right. So in a sense, the thing that's exciting is the idea of a creator economy. Right. And that's kind of the first glimmer of something actually new. And so that to me is like very, that's where I'm coming from with respect to kind of the naming of things, which comes back all the way to the sort of Web3, the original conversation we were having, right? Which is it is important because how we name and describe things kind of contains how we reason about them. Right. So if we name things, in a funny way, then we reason about them in a funny way.
Yeah, it's all about values as well, that how we name it is the language reflects our values, right? So let's, that's a problem, and we are in transition, so I can understand this is happening and we can't do much about it, but obviously maybe we have to pay more attention and be more careful in the language we use. So I won't say monetization so easily when I'm talking about creator economy, but right, let's go back to creator economy. So describe the way that you think is shaping, and introduce me to the concept of NFTs.
Yeah. So in the book 0 to 1, right? Basically, Peter Thiel says that competition is for suckers, right? And the thing that's so funny about that is that what he's really talking about is he's talking about capital I innovation, right? Disruptive innovation, right? Something that's just so new that people just can't even wrap their head around it, and they're basically, so in essence, that type of innovation creates monopolies, which he describes as good, and and obviously in the long run, I think monopolies are bad, right? Because they don't offer the kind of freedom or choices that we want, right? So, I think there's a phase where innovators monopolize, and then there's a phase where whatever they've done, should become a commodity and people should end up with freedom, right? So, if you kind of get that back to sort of the NFT concept, right? The concept of something that's non-fungible is the concept of sort of something that's just wholly novel, right? So in a sense, there's this idea of there's only one of these in the entire world, right? So that enables effectively what I would say all intellectual property to be represented by sort of an ownership key. And that ownership key then enables any number of rights to be asserted over a digital object, right? And then of course what remains to be solved is the ability to tie these digital representations to physical objects, so that obviously right now NFT dominates digital objects, and I think in the future we are going to tie them. And the reason why I think this will happen is the same reason I said before, which is that we need consensus, right? We need a consensus. We need some way of agreeing on who owns what. Right. So I think blockchains, because of the blockchain consensus algorithms, we actually have this machine adjudicated way of solving who owns what. So I think that's the final target state for NFTs. So I think all intellectual properties and all rights associated will eventually be governed by NFT, which will support this idea of a creator economy, right? Because if you've created something that's fundamentally novel that no one has ever seen before, then you should have the ability to govern what the rights are associated with this novel thing that you've created.
What is the most exciting industry for you? Where do you see NFTs bringing something completely novel, disruptive? What industry you're more excited about?
Yeah, so I've been really fascinated by a project called YGG, or Yield Guild. I think I mentioned it in the NFT event, but for people who weren't there, it basically is a game guild for what are called play to earn games, right? So effectively, they're blockchain games where people play them and they earn cryptographic assets, right? So the thing that's so interesting about a gamer guild is that the problem that guilds solve in games is really distributing the proceeds of collective action. Right. So, if you go back to things like World of Warcraft, right, people would form a guild and then they would go on these things called raids. And a raid would be where all of the members of the guild, or some, would fight together to get assets in the game. Right. And then the guild is a governance system that distributes the results. Right. They distribute. So the idea of a gamer guild is so fascinating in the context of governance and the concept of distribution of digital assets. Right. Because collective action can actually produce ownership of digital assets. Right. So, for example, YGG has been buying digital assets. The value of the assets they've purchased so far have already kind of quadrupled in value, and what they're doing is they're using this collective knowledge of their guild to basically secure, whether through gameplay or through kind of just direct purchase, highly valuable digital assets in virtual space. So I'm very excited about it. I think a lot of the players are actually underbanked. So they're living in places like the Philippines, they're living in places like Indonesia. So in a sense, this may be the mechanism through which a digital form of basic income is established, or, a way to bank at least the underbanked, right? So, if you're curious about this, I encouraged folks to look on YouTube for the Play to Earn documentary. So if you just type in play to earn documentary, you'll see just an amazing video of people, in this case in Cabanatuan, Philippines, who have gone from driving a taxi to driving these virtual creatures called axes. And they're now making a living for their families, purely in the digital realm. So this is all like stuff that fascinates me, and it's the type of thing that I described as disruptive innovation, right? Which is, this is so different from things before that people they've just begun to recognize it. But if you look at the current revenue run rate of just the game Axie Infinity, it's the game itself is producing over 100 million in direct revenue annually. So if it were a company, it would be able to IPO. So I think it's getting big.
It is amazing how they grow over the last few months, since I think they released the ROPS, they platform.
Yes.
And they upgrade their technology, and they just grow a lot. Perhaps
yes.
because the game became really scalable before they were on Ethereum, so it was
Yeah,
And
yeah, the Ronin network.
their
So
own,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
exactly.
It's been amazing.
I watched the video that you mentioned, and it was yeah, it kind of like touched me really to see these people having the ability to make money they never thought they would make, just playing Axie and leaving everything else. Right, I have to learn, and they enjoy and they were so happy. So I would definitely recommend everybody to watch it. So. Okay, right. NFTs, digital assets, the metaverse. I've done an interview with the founder of Sandbox, and I've been looking into metaverses for a bit. One question that I have, because you talk about freedom and you are kind of like high level guy about Web3, so I think maybe you can help me here. If I'm in Sandbox and I have a weapon, right? That's my digital asset.
Yes.
And I'm just going to go out and shoot other avatar because I want to do that. And,
Yes.
and that there isn't any rules that tell me you can't do that. So the question is, are going to be ethics or have to be ethics? They have to be developed in a metaverse to make it a real metaverse, which is, a virtual world where avatar can grow an economy. Because if we are saying, yeah, so the metaverse are growing a new economy, you can buy land, you can do that, you are going to get pets very soon, you can bring all your digital assets. But in a society with freedom, with society, you have rules. And in the game, weapons, they are quite popular. So how we can get the metaverse to that level? I know it's very early stage, but how do you see that being a problem?
Oh, unquestionably so, right? Because in essence, like when I talk about open systems, right, there are issues, right, related to consent, right? So ultimately, if you don't respect consent, then you can't have a system that scales, right? Because like people will have bad experiences. So if you look at a completely open system like the world, right, I could be playing a game called buy cookies at the store, right? And someone else could be playing a game called mug the person who has cookies and steal their money, and beat them unconscious, right? So like those are no longer games. Right, like that is not freedom and that is not a game, right? Because that person who's going to beat me up, it is, it's open, right? It's open, right? So to me, what creates sustainable systems,
Exactly. You
right, is
the right word, the sustainable, right?
a sustainable system has to be hugely respectful of people's consent boundary, right? And so that's really what creates sustainability. And in the long run, the competition for consent will enable the evolution of such systems. So for example, on my show, the Miko Bits show, I interviewed the founder of a game, and the game is called Star Atlas, right? And he proposed this kind of frontier zone, right? And in the frontier zone, there are certain rule modifications. One of the rule modifications is this concept of permadeath, right? So it means that if your ship is exploded, right, then the salvage rights to those ships belong to the conqueror, and in a sense, the thing that becomes important is that these zones be governed by the consent of the user, right? So in a sense, if you consent to enter such a wild west and potentially you're destroyed, right? In a sense, that consent signals that you are willing to deal with the consequences of your choice, right? Whereas, so to me, having these multiple zones, within a single environment, and so for example, another case could be things like thematic content. Right. So there may be zones where people want to see certain types of content. There may be zones that people don't want to see certain types of content. And to me, like these become so significant when you enter a world of competition for consent, because I think that right now in the open world, we're having these extremely fraught debates, right? So, for example, the deplatforming of certain actors within places like Twitter, right? Like people are talking about centralized deplatforming, whereas the creation of things like zones might be a better way to handle, right? Because then people can say, I volunteered to be in this free speech zone or whatever, and as a result, I've sacrificed my right to object to things that I would see there.
I like that, because you come back again to the concept of freedom. So within a metaverse, we can have a specific zone with specific rules. They are established by the main actors there, and everybody goes there, agrees to that. And then some other zone that will be maybe more art-based, more fashion-based, where you expect more of certain content, and maybe where you can use some certain digital assets. I think that will be fair. I think that will be actually a good way to see a metaverse evolution. Yeah, I like that. Okay, that was interesting. All right. So Miko, it was lovely to talk to you. Just to wrap it up, where people can go to, see the work that you're doing. You mentioned the podcast, you mentioned about your fund and the project that you support. So where people should find all this information?
Absolutely. So the easiest central place to go is miko.com, which is my website. So Miko. And you can go there. I think I'm active on Twitter, where you can jump from my website to my Twitter. I'm active on LinkedIn. I also have a show which you can jump from my website. So, miko.com, is sort of the index of various things that I'm, involved in. But, I think for me, my deep passion is open source, which is sort of the developers' competition for consent. And the thing that I think is beautiful about what's happened with blockchain and NFT is that it now empowers non-developers, other kinds of creators, to enter into this competition for consent, right? It allows people to join this new economy, which is an economy of ownership, and that is the only fundamentally new economy, and you can call it creator or you can call it ownership, but in a sense, that's the first fundamentally new economy proposition that's viable that we've seen, in decades. So, or even in 100 years or more. So.
And it's exciting to see how things are developing as well. Okay, Miko, thank you so much. I'm going to get you on the show again, because we didn't manage, obviously, to talk about everything, but I think it's some very important concept that came out from this interview, and definitely the concept of freedom, which, we articulate through DeFi, through the NFT space and creator economy, metaverses as well. I really enjoy it.
Wonderful. Thank you. And there is a lot more to say about metaverses and metaverse economies and things. So
I think the
happy to pursue.
The metaverse for me is so exciting. And the fact that you have so many people, they love video games, and they would like to have this metaverse to become the new world, right? But
yes.
then then is a question, are you going to take the red pill or the blue pill? And, it's actually, there is a middle way. So there is much more that I would like to talk to you, so we can leave it for another time.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Okay. Have a good day. Bye, Miko.
Bye.
All right, this was a great and quite deep interview with Miko Matsumura. And I think the main takeaway is about the concept of freedom, and is a reflection in different kind of contexts, in the DeFi context, in the creator economy, in the metaverse. And definitely we are going to explore more in our next conversation with Miko. And I really hope that you enjoy the interview. If you're not subscribed yet to the channel, please click the subscribe button, for the YouTube channel or the podcast, whatever is the best way for you to consume the content, and also follow us on social media to make sure that you are up to date with our news and interviews. And I will see you next time.